There is a woman standing at the entrance of the most expensive building in Manhattan. She is not dressed like the others around her. She wears plain dark slacks, a simple white blouse, and a coat that has seen many winters. She carries a weathered leather briefcase, the kind that belongs to someone who works, not someone who performs. Her name is Sarah Weston. And in exactly 11 minutes, every single person in that building is going to learn something they will never forget. Stay until the end, because what happens next is not a story about revenge. It is a story about what happens when the world finally runs out of ways to make someone small. Sarah Weston lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in Astoria, Queens. She took the N train every morning. She bought her coffee at the same counter diner 3 blocks from her apartment, where the owner knew her name and her order, and never asked questions she didn't want to answer. Her neighbors assumed she was a schoolteacher, or maybe an accountant, someone careful with numbers, someone who preferred a quiet life. They were not wrong about the quiet. They were wrong about everything else. Sarah had not always lived this way. There had been years before the grief, before the legal complications, before the decision she made in the long silence after her grandfather died, when her life looked very different. But that was another chapter. One she had chosen, for reasons that were entirely her own, to keep closed. She didn't talk about the Weston Group. She didn't talk about the board meetings she had missed. She didn't talk about the 52%. Not because she was ashamed, because she had learned, in the way that people learn things that cost them something, that the world treats you exactly as large or as small as you allow it to believe you are. And for now, for these last few years, she had chosen small. Until tonight. The call had come 3 days earlier. An elderly lawyer named Gerald Howarth, the last surviving partner of the firm that had handled her grandfather's estate for 40 years, had called her on a Tuesday afternoon and said exactly 6 words. "Sarah, the time has come. Tonight." He had explained the rest in a single long paragraph that Sarah listened to standing in her kitchen with a mug of tea she forgot to drink. The Weston Group, the technology conglomerate her late grandfather Edward Weston had built from a single telecommunications patent in 1971, was 3 days away from finalizing the largest corporate merger in its history. A $22 billion acquisition that would restructure the entire company and, critically, dilute the voting rights of every existing shareholder. Every shareholder except one. Sarah had not been invited to the gala. She had not been sent a car. She had not been placed on any guest list. Because no one at the Weston Group, including the current CEO Marcus Hale, had any idea that Sarah existed. That was by design. Gerald needed her there in person tonight to deliver one document. A notarized declaration of shareholder identity that would need to be physically presented before the merger was signed. A legal formality built into her grandfather's original trust. A formality that, if missed, would expire at midnight. Sarah had agreed. She had ironed her good blouse. She had taken the N train. And now she stood at the entrance of the Meridian Grand Hotel on Park Avenue, rain beginning to collect in her hair, with a legal document inside a leather briefcase and a quiet expression that revealed absolutely nothing. Julian Ashcroft was the director of marketing for the Weston Group. He was 38 years old, had the kind of face that had been trained to project authority, and had not experienced a doubt about his own importance in at least 6 years, which was exactly how long ago he had ended his engagement to Sarah Weston. He had ended it on a Thursday morning over breakfast, in the apartment they had shared in Murray Hill. He had said, with a composure he had clearly rehearsed, that he needed someone who matched his trajectory, someone with presence, ambition, class. He had moved in with Vivienne Laurent, heiress to a European luxury goods empire, within 4 months. Julian had organized tonight's gala with the meticulous obsession of someone for whom events were performances, and performances were proof of worth. Every floral arrangement approved personally, every seat assigned by strategic calculation, the guest list reviewed 3 times. He did not know who Sarah Weston was. He knew who Edward Weston had been, of course. But Edward Weston had died 11 years ago. His family had been paid out, bought out, moved on. Or so everyone believed. Julian was standing near the entrance when he saw her. A woman in a plain coat, carrying an old briefcase, trying to speak to the security detail at the door. He felt immediately a familiar irritation. The security officer at the door was a large man named Todd, who was very good at his job and understood it to be fundamentally a job about keeping certain people out. Sarah explained, quietly and without urgency, that she had been sent by Gerald Howarth and needed to deliver a document to someone inside. She did not have a printed invitation. She had not been placed on the guest list. Todd was consulting his tablet when Julian arrived. "Is there a problem here?" Julian looked at Sarah the way someone looks at a stain on a suit. The specific, calibrated distaste of a person whose entire identity depends on surfaces. Sarah looked at him. Something happened in that moment, a flicker of recognition, quickly suppressed on both sides, that neither of them acknowledged. "I need to deliver a document," she said. "I was sent by Gerald Howarth. I'm not familiar with that name, and I don't see you on our guest list. This is a private event." "I understand. If you'd like to make a call, I'd like you to leave." He said it the way someone says something they've decided before the other person finishes speaking. Sarah was quiet for a moment. "I need 5 minutes. There is a legal document in this briefcase that... There is a line of actual guests behind you." He looked at Todd. "Please ask her to step aside." It was what happened next that the people who were there would describe differently depending on who they were. Julian, who had an audience now, a small cluster of well-dressed men and women who had paused near the entrance, made a decision. He took the visitor's badge that Todd had begun preparing, the small laminated card that would have given Sarah access to the lobby, and he tore it. Not in half. He tore it slowly into pieces and dropped it on the marble floor between them. "People like you clean this floor. You don't walk on it." He said it quietly. Not shouting, not making a scene in the way that loses you the room. He said it in that composed, certain voice he had spent years developing. The voice that said, "I am the kind of person who gets to say this." Sarah looked at the pieces of the badge on the floor. She looked at Julian. Her expression did not change. She took one step back, opened her briefcase, and with the same quiet efficiency with which she did everything, she took out her phone. She made one call. Gerald Howarth picked up on the first ring. "Gerald, I'm outside. They won't let me in." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Gerald said 3 words, in the voice of a man who had practiced law for 50 years and understood exactly what those words would set in motion. "Give me 4 minutes." Sarah ended the call. She stood on the wet marble steps outside the Meridian Grand, the rain in her hair, the briefcase at her side. Julian had watched the call from inside the entrance with the expression of someone who has already moved on to the next thing. He turned to the guests who had witnessed the exchange and offered a small, dismissive smile, the kind that said, "You see what I have to deal with." Several of them smiled back. None of them knew that inside the building on the 14th floor, a phone was ringing in the private suite of Marcus Hale, CEO of the Weston Group, and that everything was about to change. Marcus Hale was 55 years old and had run the Weston Group for 7 years. He was a man who had trained himself to remain composed in any situation. He had negotiated billion-dollar deals in rooms where the air itself felt pressurized. He was not prepared for this phone call. Gerald Howarth, whose name Marcus recognized immediately, because Gerald Howarth was the kind of name that appeared on documents that defined the structural reality of everything Marcus had spent 7 years building, spoke in the calm, measured voice of someone who has waited a long time to make this particular call. He explained who Sarah was. He explained what the trust contained. He explained the 52%. And then he explained that Sarah was currently standing outside the Meridian Grand in the rain, having been denied entry by one of Marcus's employees. There was a pause on Marcus's end of the line. A long pause. The kind of pause where a man recalibrates everything he thinks he knows about the ground beneath his feet. Where is she right now? Outside. On the steps. It's raining. Marcus ended the call, stood up, and moved. What happened next was noticed by everyone in the gala and understood by no one, until it was explained. The lights dimmed for exactly 3 seconds. This was not a power failure. This was not a technical glitch. This was the visual signal that Gerald Howarth and Marcus Hale had agreed upon, in their 4-minute phone call, to tell the security detail downstairs that the situation had changed. Julian, who was now moving through the main hall with the satisfied posture of someone who has handled a small problem effectively, noticed the lights and stopped. Then he noticed that Marcus Hale was moving across the room. Not walking, but moving with a focused urgency that was entirely out of character for a man known for his composure. Marcus was heading for the main staircase. Julian watched him descend. He felt, for the first time all evening, a cold and undefined unease. Marcus Hale descended the stairs of the Meridian Grand at a pace that caused heads to turn. He moved through the lobby. He passed his own executives. He passed the board members who had flown in from London and Singapore for this event. He passed the journalists who would be writing about tonight's merger in the morning. He pushed through the main doors and stepped outside into the rain. Sarah was still on the steps. She looked at him with that same expression she had held since the beginning of the evening. Calm, still, completely unperformed. Marcus Hale stopped in front of her. He was a tall man, with the authority of someone accustomed to rooms rearranging themselves around his presence. And then, in full view of the guests who had gathered at the entrance in the rain on the steps of the Meridian Grand, while the most important merger in the company's history waited on the 14th floor, Marcus Hale bent his knee, not as a theatrical gesture, as a man who has just understood something about the nature of power that he had been wrong about for a very long time. "Ms. Weston, I am deeply sorry. Please, come inside." He said it clearly. He said it loudly enough that the people at the entrance could hear every word. The silence that followed was the kind that makes the air feel different. Sarah looked at him for a moment. Then she stepped forward and walked through the door. Marcus Hale did something that night that he had not planned to do. He stood at the center of the main hall, the stage where, in 20 minutes, he had been scheduled to give a speech about the future of the company, and he asked for the room's attention. The music stopped. He spoke for approximately 4 minutes. He told them about Edward Weston, the man who had founded the company, who had built it from a single patent and an absolute clarity of vision, who had run it for 31 years before his death. He told them about the family trust, about Edward's design, deliberate and legal, to ensure that control of the company never became purely institutional, that there would always be a human being, a Weston, with the final word. And he told them who Sarah was. He told them that the woman standing beside him, who had been denied entry to this event, who had been spoken to in a way that Marcus described, carefully and precisely, as unacceptable, was the sole living heir of Edward Weston, the holder of 52% of the company's voting shares, held in trust through a family holding company that had never been dissolved and had never been bought out. He told them that the merger they were celebrating tonight, the merger that was 3 days from being signed, could not legally proceed without her signature. He told them that he was grateful she was there. The room was completely silent. Sarah did not use a microphone. Her voice carried anyway. The voice of someone who has spent years in rooms that didn't know how to receive her, and learned to speak as if the room's awareness was entirely optional. "My grandfather built this company because he believed that the right technology, built with the right intention, could make the world more equitable, not just more profitable. He used to say that a company that only answers to its balance sheet eventually stops answering to anything that matters." She paused. "I have been watching this company for 11 years. I have been watching carefully. And I am here tonight not because of the merger, and not because of the document in this briefcase, but because of what I have been deciding for the last several months, that I want to do with the position I was given and have never yet used. Another pause. That conversation begins tomorrow. In a boardroom. With everyone who needs to be in it. She looked at Marcus. Tonight we can continue with what was planned. I'll sign what needs signing after I've read it. But I want it understood by everyone in this room that the Weston Group has a shareholder who is paying attention now. She stepped back. The applause when it came was not the polite applause of a corporate event. It was the kind of applause that surprises the people doing it. The kind that happens when a room recognizes something true. Julian Ashcroft did not applaud. He stood at the edge of the room and understood in stages what had happened and what it meant. He understood that the woman he had spoken those words to, on the steps of the Meridian Grand in front of witnesses, was the controlling shareholder of the company he worked for. He understood that he had torn her visitor badge into pieces and dropped them on the floor. He understood that several people in this room had seen that moment and would not forget it. He understood that Marcus Hale had specifically used the word unacceptable. And he understood because Julian was, underneath everything else, a man who understood how companies worked, that there was no version of the next 48 hours in which he still had a job. His phone buzzed. A message from his assistant. Julian, call me when you get a minute. It's important. Re Vivian. He looked at the message for a moment. Vivian Lawrence's family empire had been under financial pressure for 2 years. He had chosen not to look too closely at that. He had been very busy not looking closely. He typed nothing back. He put his phone in his pocket. He set his champagne glass on the nearest surface and walked to the exit. No one stopped him. No one noticed him leave, which was, in its own way, the most complete version of the punishment the evening had prepared for him. Sarah spent 2 hours in a private room on the 14th floor of the Meridian Grand with Gerald Howarth, Marcus Hale, and 3 corporate attorneys. She read the merger documents carefully. Every page. She asked questions that made the attorneys, who had assumed this would be a formality, recalibrate their posture. She requested 3 amendments. 2 were agreed to immediately. The third required a separate conversation, scheduled for the following week. When Sarah finally signed, it was 10:47 at night. Marcus looked at her across the table. May I ask why now? You've held these shares for 11 years. Sarah considered the question. Because my grandfather asked me to wait until I was ready. Not until it was convenient. Until I was ready. And now you are. Now I am. Julian Ashcroft received his termination notice on a Tuesday morning. The stated reason was professional conduct. It was accurate and it was final, and it was delivered by HR in a meeting that lasted 11 minutes. He did not contest it. He had considered it, had spent the previous 48 hours constructing arguments in his head that dissolved each time he arrived at the part where he was standing in front of witnesses, saying those words. He cleared his desk that afternoon. Vivian had called on Sunday. The news about her family's financial situation, which had been circulating in quieter rooms for months, had finally moved into the open. The Loron Empire, it turned out, had been largely theoretical for the better part of 2 years. The inheritance that had defined her social identity was under litigation. Julian sat in the elevator on his way out of the Weston Group building and thought, for the first time in a very long time, about what he actually had. Not what he had performed, what he had. The list was shorter than the elevator ride. On the morning after the gala, Sarah Weston took the N train home. She had been offered a car. Marcus had insisted. She had declined. She sat in the plastic seat with the briefcase in her lap and watched Queens come into view through the window. The familiar rooftops, the water towers, the morning light hitting the elevated tracks with the particular orange clarity that only happens in early spring in New York. She did not feel victorious. That wasn't the word. And it was never the word she would have chosen. She felt more than anything accurate. Like something that had been slightly out of alignment had finally been put straight. Her grandfather had said something to her once. when she was 12 years old and furious about some injustice she couldn't now remember. He had said, "Patience is not the same as passivity, Sarah. It's just the longer game." She had spent 11 years learning what he meant. She thought she understood it now. The train pulled into the Astoria station. She got off, walked to the diner, ordered her usual coffee. The owner, without looking up, started the machine. Everything looked exactly the same. Everything had changed. Sarah's story is not a story about revenge. It is not a story about getting even, or about the pleasure of watching someone fall who once stood above you. Those things happened, but they are the side effects, not the point. The point is this: there are people in the world who carry power invisibly, who choose, for reasons that are entirely their own, to move through life without declaring what they are. Not from weakness, from a kind of discipline that most of the people around them will never understand. Julian saw a woman in a plain coat with an old briefcase and decided, in the space of 4 seconds, that he knew exactly what she was worth. He was not unusual for doing this. He was just more visible than most. Because what Julian did at that entrance, the tearing of the badge, the words, the dismissal, is something that happens every single day in 1,000 smaller ways to people whose value the world has decided to look past. Most of them are not holding 52%. But all of them are carrying something the world has decided not to see. Sarah's story is about what it looks like when someone who has been made invisible by the world's assumptions chooses, on her own timeline, in her own way, for her own reasons, to become visible. Not to prove anything. To be accurate. If you have a story, a moment when the world underestimated you, or someone you love, this community wants to hear it. It doesn't need to be a billion-dollar story. Just needs to be true. Write to us at vellumoflife@gmail.com. Every story shared here is treated with complete respect and absolute confidentiality. Real names are changed. Cities are altered. Every detail that could identify you is carefully transformed before it is ever told. We don't expose people. We tell the truth about the human spirit. If this story found something in you tonight, a recognition, a memory, a name you haven't said out loud in a long time, carry it with you. And if you know someone who needs to be reminded today that invisible does not mean small, share it with them quietly. That is how these stories travel. From one person who understands to one person who needs it. Until the next chapter.